this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to Briefings Direct. Our next technology innovation thought leadership discussion focuses on how digital payments are catching on for many more companies in the business world, following the popularity of digital payments like Apple Pay in the consumer world. We'll now explore how digital payment solutions are changing the game for small companies like 487 Consulting Services, which is seeing faster and simpler payments using AribaPay. And we'll hear more about how AribaPay is expanding around the globe. With that, please join me in welcoming our guests. We're here with Drew Hoffler, the Senior Director of Marketing at SAP Ariba. Welcome, Drew.
Thank you, Dana. Great to be here.
We're also here with Ken Kraus, Principal Consultant and Owner at 487 Consulting Services in Folsom, California. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And we're also here with Bill Doolin, the Vice President of Commercial Payments at Discover in Chicago. Welcome, Bill.
Hey, thank you.
Drew, let's start with you. For almost anything that consumers want to buy these days, there's a swipe or there's a card chip, or we're now into wireless connectivity. And yet with business to business, we're still many times faxing and writing paper checks, and it's largely still a manual process. So why such a dichotomy between what people can do as a consumer buying gasoline, for example, or a company buying goods and services?
Yeah, it's fundamentally the difference between payments in a B2B and a consumer world. Consumers, it's relatively simple. Everything that you're going to buy is in a single cart at the time of payment, and it all takes place in one spot. The information and the payment itself happens together. In the business-to-business world, that is just simply not the case. In the business-to-business world, you have an invoice that comes in for a good delivered or a service rendered, and then payment may happen 30, 45, 60, 90 days later. And that payment may include more than one invoice. Oftentimes in the B2B context, it includes hundreds of invoices on a single credit of funds into an account. And so in the B2B context, there is a huge gap between the payment and the information, and that's what we're trying to solve, and that's where the innovation needs to come, is bringing that information that's necessary for all parties to know what's being paid for, when, and why, bringing that together with the settlement of funds in a very secure environment.
But we're closing the gap. Tell us a little bit about AribaPay, how long it's been around, and why it's now in a position to begin closing that gap even more rapidly than ever.
Absolutely. Now, RebaPay, we launched general availability a little over a year ago, and we started here in North America, and we've seen rapid growth in that. We just announced that we're expanding into Canada with our partner Discover. We are also then expanding later in the year into Europe and Latin America. So it's because even though the payment systems are different, the fundamental issue with B2B payment, the disconnect between information and the settlement of funds, that's the same no matter where you go geographically. So that's where we've been, where we're going with that. We're taking this global, and why we're in a position to really change the game and innovate in B2B payment is because we sit at the nexus of the digital networked age, which is a very different age from where payments began. So you have electronic payments now, like ACH in the U.S. or SEPA in Europe. And both of those were created really back in the electronic payments back in the 70s, based on a paradigm of that time, which was COBOL-based mainframes behind brick walls, and there was no way to connect a buyer's systems with the supplier's systems. But now we live in a digital age, right, where the Ariba network connects millions of buyers and suppliers together to transact and move terabytes of data in real time between back-end systems. So instead of doing what B2B payments and electronic payments have done in the past, which is try to take a small subset of that information out and attach it to the payment, to the ACH or to the SEPA, 140 characters in Europe to tweet, or 80 characters in the U.S., we're instead taking the payment and attaching it to all of this information that's already on the Ariba network, the PO, the invoice, the reason why the invoice may be paid a little less than was expected. All of that information is fully available on the network. We make it visible with the payment so that both buyers and suppliers know exactly what's being paid, why it's being paid, what this $1 million deposit is, even if it's 1,000 invoices, and why it may be a little different than the supplier was expecting. All of that is fully visible and available on the Ariba network.
Bill, tell us a bit about the role that Discover plays in all this, and perhaps how do you feel about the gap closing between what happens in the consumer space and what can now happen in the business space?
Yeah, I think I would like to start off with what AribaPay is not, and it's not a card offering. So usually people, when they see the Discover logo, they're thinking of a credit card offering. Well, this is not that. We're using our infrastructure to facilitate commercial payments. So in that case, we're making sure that we're gathering the bank account information. We're acting as the financial institute of record. We're boarding the suppliers. So all of that information is now in our trusted network, right? So that's how we show up as the financial institution, as the bank, so that we then move the money. And as Drew talked about a little bit, along with that data as well. So that's really where the gap's closing, is we're bringing the data and the financial transaction together.
And Drew, this is not just for large companies. It should be for any company. And the long tail, if you will, the larger number of people involved will be those small, medium-sized businesses. Is there something in it that's different or special for them other than your global 2,000 corporations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, particularly for the receivers of payment on that long tail, right? The large companies have the IT resources they need to manage the complex electronic payment that is available today, that's based on EDI and things like that, and that's great. But then the mid-sized to the smaller suppliers simply don't have the technical resources to consume the information in those formats. They just can't do it. So what AribaPay really does is it makes it as simple as possible. It is as simple as an email with the information about the payment and a link into their account in the Ariba network that they can visibly see all the information around their payment in a very nice UI. If there is, for example, if they were expecting a $1,000 payment and they got $900, well, the big question is, well, why is that? There may be 10 invoices on that payment. Well, if they come in, they click that link, they come right into their account on the network, they see the payment ID for that $900 that they got, and we show them exactly what was invoiced, $1,000, what you expected $1,000, you received $900, and here exactly is where the difference is from. They have hyperlinks to go into the invoice. They can see the comments that may have been made on why maybe something was broken on the pallet, and so they only paid for 9 items instead of 10. But all of that in a very simple online experience.
Great. Ken, let's go to you. Tell me a bit about 487 Consulting Services, what you do, and then we'll ask a little bit about how you like to get paid.
Thank you very much. Yes, 487 Consulting Services is my personal business. It's a one-man shop. I literally get up in the morning, walk over and turn on the coffee pot, and walk over to my desk. So that's probably the best part of being an independent. The other side of being an independent, though, is that I am responsible for every single aspect of the business, from the very essence of submitting the financial filings that we did with Discover and getting on board with everybody and actually doing the work for which I'm getting paid is all done by me and is controlled by me. There's no IT department. There's no human resources department. There's no large infrastructure behind me. It's just me. And so I came to Ariba via a customer that said they wanted to pay me that way. Initially, I was a little apprehensive because I was expecting to have to learn a new program, and I could just flash back to COBOL in college back in the 80s, and that just was petrifying. But the simplicity and the transparency of Ariba was just refreshing. The first webinar I attended, although scheduled for 30 minutes, although scheduled for 1 hour, I thought it only lasted about 30 minutes because of the simplicity of the nature. And then within a couple of days, I was able to get all my paperwork together for Discover, and I was live on Ariba within less than a week. 2 weeks later, I received my first series of payments through Ariba and have been now receiving payments since the 1st of January 2015. And Ariba's processed something north of 300 invoices for me, amounting to probably 500 to 600 individual tasks.
Great. Now, I think there's going to be more and more folks like you, smaller businesses, independents, working to provide discrete services throughout our economy around the world, many of them working off just a smartphone. So this is an important part of our growing economy. But also, I think it's important for an organization like yours to have great visibility, to know when the money is coming, when to expect it. Cash flow, pretty important. So tell me a little bit about that. visibility, expectation, and how this system worked better perhaps than paper and faxes and checks?
Probably best if I just take a step back from that and review where I was before Ariba. And like you mentioned, it was a paper invoicing system. My customer required that each purchase order be on a separate piece of paper for the purposes of invoicing. So I might create 15 or 20 invoices, put them all in the same envelope with a nice little transmittal sheet, mail them off, and 75 days later, when I'm not getting paid for some invoice, I would then get a hold of them, and they would say, whoops, your invoice is not in our system. And I'd start all over again. And that would be a timeout from work. I had to stop what I was doing, resubmit the invoice, and then start the clock all over again. Now with the Ariba network, when it comes time to do my invoicing, I do it about twice a month. I open my Ariba account, identify the purchase order to be billed, click the service that's to be billed, and click the submit button. And quite literally, the invoicing is just that simple. Within a matter of minutes, I receive recognition that the invoice is in the system. As opposed to waiting 75 days for confirmation that it's not there, I receive a positive affirmation within just a matter of minutes. And then within 48 to 72 hours later, I have a customer who has acknowledged and has approved that invoice for payment. At that point, I know with certainty that that payment is going to come in and on a date certain. I can forecast my cash accordingly and then go on vacation. I don't have to worry about it.
And also, Drew mentioned this opportunity for more rich information to be associated with the transaction, remittance information, for example. Have you been able to avail yourself of that? And is that an important part of what you're doing, being able to see all the information associated with an invoice or a payment process?
Absolutely. When I get the notifications of the payment being in there, it's broken down line item by line item that corresponds to the exact tasks that I've done for that particular payment. I enjoy the fact that it is all in one payment and broken out that way. In the past, a year and a half ago, I might receive individual payments for all of those invoices. So I would get an envelope in the mail that might have a dozen checks in it, and then would have to go back and reconcile one check against one invoice. And it was just a very time-consuming and very clumsy effort, because the other part of that is that I wouldn't necessarily get paid for all of my invoices submitted on a given date at the same time. And so I'd get paid for 10 of the 12 invoices, and then would have to start this tail wagging the dog episode of chasing around payments on the other invoices. And payments sometimes, although the majority of them might be paid in 60 days, it wasn't uncommon that they'd stretch out to 120 to 150 days.
Bill, any thoughts from the Discover perspective on the ability to not just repave cow paths, but actually do things in business that could not have been done before, given that we're digitizing these processes?
I think probably a key for us in this, and we haven't talked about it too much, is really the compliance that's around it, right? So as we're moving these payments, knowing who the customer is, right? Anti-money laundering, all the regulatory compliance that goes around it. And so I think that makes it a more robust payment. We become more sophisticated as the technology that wraps around that payment to know where it's going, where it should be going. If something has happened that triggers it, that makes us stop and take a look, right? To make sure, sometimes we talk about purposeful friction, right? Something triggered an event that made us stop the payment and take a look around and make sure that we have it, right? The other is really, from our perspective in this case, it's not as so much of the technology as it's pulling that sensitive information out of ERPs or other places that it shouldn't be, and then putting it in a financial institution, right? And using that technology around it to help secure that.
Now, we've heard a lot at the recent Ariba Live conference about risk reduction and visibility into supply chain, that it's really about managing your supply chain. Is there something about using RebaPay when you have all that data associated that gives people perhaps more insight into their supply chain than they might have had, auditability, the ability to further define what it is that they want in terms of best practices? Drew.
Sure. More data is better than less data as long as you can consume it and put it in a usable format, and that's really what we're doing. Knowing exactly who's getting paid and removing the opportunities for fraud in the payment process is huge, and that AribaPay really removes those opportunities for fraud, or a vast majority of them. Now, when we have this whole platform of information and data about the interactions between a buyer and their supplier, from the moment that they source to when they procure, to the PO, to the invoice, to the payment going through, and they can see the on-time performance. They can see maybe how often that supplier requests early payment if they're using dynamic discounting on the Ariba network, and they can start to define, they can feed that back into the procurement side and start to define payment terms as a result of that right at the very beginning.
Okay, great. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a BriefingsDirect Thought Leadership podcast discussion on how digital payments are catching on for many more companies in the business world. And we've seen how the popularity of digital payments in the consumer world is now spreading to the B2B payments world. So please join me now in thanking our guests. We've been joined by Drew Hoffler, the Senior Director of Marketing at SAP Ariba. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you, Dana. It was my pleasure.
We've also been joined by Ken Kraus, Principal Consultant and Owner at 487 Consulting Services. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
And we've also been here with Bill Doolin, the Vice President of Commercial Payments at Discover. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Dana.
And a big thank you, too, to our audience for joining this SAP Ariba-sponsored Business Innovation Thought Leadership discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator. Thanks again for listening, and do come back next time.